Several years before Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's death in 1972, he suffered a near-fatal heart attack from which he never fully recovered. His student and friend, Rabbi Samuel Dresner, went to see him at his New York apartment. Heschel managed to get out of bed and greet him. He was sitting in the living room when Dresner arrived. Heschel was weak and pale, speaking with some effort. Dresner leaned in to catch his words. "Sam, when I regained consciousness, my first feelings were not of despair or anger. I felt only gratitude to God for my life, for every moment that I had lived. I was ready to depart. Take me, O Lord, I thought. I have seen so many miracles in my lifetime." Exhausted by the effort, he paused for a moment and then added, "That is what I meant when I wrote, I did not ask for success, I asked for wonder, and you gave it to me." This week's Parsha contains a wondrous moment. I want to consider that moment with you today and see what we might learn from it. But before we get there, I want to consider also the after effects of that moment, because sometimes, most of the time, I think, we know best where we've been when we notice how different we've become. There's an idiom used to describe Yaakov just before he encounters Rachel. The JPS translation reports Jacob resumed his journey and came to the land of the Easterners. Now, on the face of it, this is pretty straightforward, but the Hebrew tells a different story. Vayisa Yaakov raglav, vayelech arza v'nei kedem. And Jacob lifted his feet and went toward the land of the Easterners. Now, what does this mean, Jacob lifted his feet? Isn't that just how people walk? But this is a strange phrase. Rashi, the 11th century commentator, says it has to do with the events of the previous chapter. Mishanit baser besorot tovot shehuftach b'shmirah. As soon as he received the good tidings that he was assured of God's protection, Nasa libo et raglav v'nasa kal lalechet. His heart lifted up his feet, and it became easier to walk. So until this moment, Yaakov was dragging a bit. But something happened that lifted his spirits, and that lifting of spirits quite literally gave Yaakov a spring in his step. Modern biblical scholar Robert Alter says, although eyes are frequently lifted or raised in these narratives, the idiom of lifting the feet occurs only here. And he points out that there's a symmetry here between this and the end of Yaakov's journey in this moment. What then happens afterwards? Yaakov's heart lifts his feet, as it were, and his feet carry him to his beloved, Rachel. And their encounter is so moving to Yaakov that the Torah tells us, Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel, vayisa et kolo vayefk. Again, the standard English translation leaves something critical out. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and broke into tears, it reads. But the Hebrew actually reads, Jacob kissed Rachel and he lifted his voice and wept. Before meeting Rachel, Yaakov can barely stay on the ground. After meeting her, he can barely contain his emotions. Yaakov is a man bursting out from himself. And one more thing happens right after this. You may recall that Yaakov comes to the well, and when he sees Rachel, he's so kind of taken by her that all of a sudden he has this enormous strength, and he's able to lift off this giant stone from the well all by himself, something which is done normally by a group of people. But all of this, it seems, is due to an enraptured experience from the previous chapter. Yaakov didn't ask for wonder, but even so, he found it. This is what the scene was about. This is what happens in that moment that seems to have informed this moment with Yaakov. Vayetze Yaakov, and Yaakov went out from Beersheba and set out for Haran. Now, why is Yaakov leaving in the first place? You may recall that he and his brothers have had a falling out. Esav is upset for having been duped out of his birthright and for having had his blessing stolen outright. He's mad, so mad that he wishes to murder his own brother. As soon as the time for mourning my father comes round, I will kill Jacob, my brother, he says. I won't kill you now because it would upset Dad, but just as soon as he's no longer around, you watch out. Now, Yaakov isn't messing around. He believes Esav, and so he flees. We can only imagine that Yaakov is in quite a state, alone, adrift in the middle of nowhere, and that's when it happens, the wondrous moment. He came upon a certain place, and he stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. He had a dream. A stairway was set on the ground, and its top reached to the sky, and the angels of God were going up and down on it. Now, one note about translation. Often we translate sulam as ladder, but in this historical context, it's probably a stairway. Alter says, think of it as in terms of a Mesopotamian motif, considering that it's to Mesopotamia that Yaakov is fleeing. He thinks sulam, Alter that is, thinks sulam is best translated as ramp, actually. Consider a vast ramp, he writes, with terraced landings. In other words, Yaakov is watching angels moving up and down on a celestial ziggurat of sorts. The story continues. And the Holy One was standing beside him and said, I am Hashem, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The ground on which you are lying I will assign to you and your offspring. Your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants. Remember, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. This is the moment where you wonder how Yaakov is going to take all of this. It's a positive experience, of course. The blessings with which he is assured are abundant. But will it feel too overwhelming? Will he demur or resist his chosen role, like Moshe generations later? One can imagine a number of potential reactions, but Yaakov's chief reaction is surprise, awe, wonder. Vayomer, Achen yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh, va'anochi lo yadati. Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely, what is that jingling? I don't know. Can we try to stop the jingling up there? Maybe you could just take a look. See what's going on. Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely God is present in this place, and I did not know it. Shaken, he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the abode of God, and that is a gateway to heaven. And then, having been surprised by the experience, he does what any of us might do in that moment. He marks the occasion. He captures the moment. When we were hiking out west this summer and had numerous experiences of the divine, the glory and grandeur of God's creation, we took photos and videos so we could share our enthusiasm and remember our emotional experiences years later. Yaakov does the ancient equivalent of this. Early in the morning, Jacob took the stones that he had put under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. Like Heschel, Yaakov has a near-death experience. Like Heschel, he is granted a vision, a sense of renewed purpose. Like Heschel, he comes out of that experience with a sense of gratitude and awe. And so he floats to his bride-to-be. And so his heart leaps from his chest in tears of joy. Yaakov is a man buoyed by wonder, and his sense of wonder animates his future experiences. The deepest wisdom man can attain is to know that his destiny is to aid, to serve. Heschel writes in Man is Not Alone. Rabbi Dresner explains that he believes Heschel came out of his near-death experience with a renewed sense of purpose. 10 days before his death, Heschel had taped a television interview for NBC in which he had asked if he had a special message for young people. He nodded his head. Above all, remember that you must build your life as if it were a work of art. The day before his death, recounts Dresner, Heschel insisted upon traveling to Connecticut to stand outside a federal prison in the freezing snow, waiting for the release of a friend, a priest who had been jailed for civil protest. Heschel asked for wonder because he knew that in wonder one discovers one's purpose. The question I want to leave us with is, how can we do the same? I think too often we have moments of joy, of wonder and exaltation, but we don't know how to channel that energy into future holy steps, because most of the time we expect little of the world. So here's my suggestion. Over the next week, I want to invite us to pay attention to that which might surprise us. The hardest thing about wonder is that we tend to close ourselves off to the possibility of it. We fully expect the world, people, experiences to fit our preconceived notions or our past experiences of them. Heschel's invitation, though, is to ask for wonder, to greet the world with a sense of possibility. If you can, keep track of the moments when you're surprised this coming week. Do some journaling if you like, but most important, when those moments of wonder do occur, try to hold on to them. Try to, as Yaakov did, lift your feet. If you do this, you might discover, as he did, that the next thing that happens after wonder is joy. And like Heschel, you might also discover that we only really experience joy, not pleasure, but joy, when we embody a sense of purpose. Awe, writes Heschel, is a sense for the transcendence, for the reference everywhere to mystery beyond all things. It enables us to perceive in the world intimations of the divine, to sense the ultimate in the common and the simple, to feel in the rush of passing the stillness of the eternal. There is a world waiting to be discovered. When God blesses Yaakov during his night vision at Bethel, Yaakov doesn't awaken with a sense of his own greatness. Surely God was in this place and I did not know it. Yaakov's destiny is to discover that which is greater than him. And discovering that, he finds that he can almost fly. This week, let's see if we too can put a little spring in our step. Shabbat Shalom.